Hey everybody, welcome back to Jim's Garage. It's time to continue the remote desktop series, and this time we're looking at Guacamole. In the last video I covered Rustdesk and even paired that up with something like Tailscale. I'll be doing the whole thing again this time, instead using Guacamole. Guacamole is great and it seems to be the fan favourite amongst the home lab community. It's created by Apache, it's open source, it's free, and it has a ton of documentation. I've really enjoyed setting this up, and here I am to share my configuration with you, talk about what it can and cannot do, and also hopefully overcome any hurdles you've had with installation. Right, let's have a quick overview, then we'll jump into the settings, and then we'll get this thing up and running, both locally and also with the help of a mesh VPN. But before we do any of that, I want to tell you about a tool that's genuinely leveled up the way I learn. It's called Brilliant.org. Brilliant is hands down the most effective way to learn technical skills because you're not just watching videos or cramming facts, you're solving problems every step of the way. Their approach is all about active learning. You build real problem solving skills by doing, with intuitive visuals and step-by-step feedback that helps you think like a developer, a scientist, or a systems designer. And here's what I love. It's built for consistency. You can jump in for just 10 to 15 minutes a day. It's so easy to build a powerful daily learning habit without burning out. Plus, it works on mobile. So whether you're commuting, waiting in line, or taking a break between meetings, you can actually learn on the go. No excuses. If you're serious about leveling up your thinking in math, computer science, physics, you name it, Brilliant is a no-brainer. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit the link and scan the QR code on screen. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Now, back to the content. Now, taking a quick look at the architecture that's provided on the official website, you can see here that when we access this with this HTML5 browser up here, we go to our server here, which is in a container. In this instance, we will be deploying it in Docker, but you don't have to. You can check out the documentation here over the left for installing Guacamole without Docker. But effectively, the Guacamole container connects to the guacd. There's also a database. Do remember this. We'll go on to the configuration in a moment. And then effectively, we route out of that container via different protocols, dependent on the OS we want to access. So typically RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, that will go to Windows, but it also can go to things like Linux, especially Ubuntu, but more typically VNC for Linux and others, i.e. we can do things like we can SSH into virtual machines, and we can have that also within the browser. Now, the documentation here for installing this is varied and in detail, so choose what suits you, but I am going to be doing this with Docker. Now, for a Docker setup, the only bit that's slightly confusing is probably the initialization of the database. Now, in this case, we can go down on the official website and it will actually say that you need to set the database up yourself. We're not going to give you the initialization scripts. But thankfully, I found a script online to help us with that. Now, without further ado, thank you very much to Bosch Kundendienst. You can correct me in the comments. But this person has kindly created a script to simplify the installation process. And if you want to find out what it's actually doing, you can check the prepare.sh file. Now, it's pretty simplistic what it's doing, but the main crux here is when you initialize a database, you need to create some tables, etc., store some credentials. But the Apache Guacamole installation doesn't do that for you. It wants you to do that yourself. Now, thankfully, this script is going to do exactly that. And whilst this uses Nginx proxy, I've stripped kind of this bit out and I've put traffic proxy in. That's my preferred proxy. But kudos to this person. I want to give them credit. Please head over to their GitHub, give them a like, etc. They've done some good work here. So without further ado, let's go into the Docker setup. We'll be going into VS Code for this. And you can find my video on how to deploy containers with VS Code, SSH into it, etc. as well in the link above. So the compose file that I have does rely on the GitHub I just mentioned, but I have tweaked it predominantly because mine is going to use MySQL as opposed to the Postgres. The reason I've done that is just because the instructions to get MySQL up and running is quicker, and we don't necessarily need the benefits of Postgres for what we're trying to achieve here in a home lab, but you can spin this up with Postgres if you want to. Now, this stack is pretty straightforward. You can see that we've got the Guac daemon running here, we've then got the database running here, and then we've got the Guacamole server itself. Now, the only bit we need to pay special attention to is we actually need to run this here first. And what that's going to do is create all the folders that we need, and you can see here that we've got various volumes, etc. It will create those volumes and then it will actually initialize the database. So let's have a quick look at what's happening here. So we're making the files, we're modifying the initialization folder, and then we're running this command here, this docker run. And basically what that creates is, you can see here, you can actually change that to Postgres if you're using Postgres. It will create this initdb.sql file. And what we need to do is basically create that file, and then we're going to mount it into the container, and you'll see that here, and that will set up initialize all of the tables. Now all of this is taken from the official documentation, which you can see here. We're currently on version 1.60. And you can see here how it's using that command to initialize the database, and then it's going to mount it. Here they're using Docker volumes, but I'm using a bind mount. So if we quickly run through this whole stack just to make sure we know what's happening, all of the containers are on this Guac network. It's going to have the drive and the record folders, basically for storage. The /record folder, you can actually record the sessions that you're doing, which is pretty nice. The MySQL server, basically that just specifies the passwords, the database name, the user, etc. And then we have that script that's mounted that we're going to generate in a moment. And then finally, we've actually got the Guacamole itself, which essentially relies on the other two containers. And you can see that here with this depends on. Now we've got the hostname of the Guac daemon. We've specified all of the database credentials here. Obviously go and change these credentials, make them secure, but this is just a demonstration. We've then got this web app context for root. So what that does is means that we don't have to have that /guacamole at the end of the URL. I'll show you that later. And then we specified the Guac network again, but I've also added in here the proxy network, which if we scroll down is what I'm going to be using for traffic. So if you do follow this and you've been following my videos before and you use traffic as your reverse proxy, this will get it up and running with a nice SSL certificate. Now with all of that set up, we're pretty much ready to go. So the first thing we need to do is we need to hop in and make sure we run this script here. Now if you've just downloaded this, you may need to modify the permissions. So you may need to do, say, a chmod and then make it executable for this prepare. That basically looks like that. Then hopefully what we should be able to do is just run that script. And once that's run, you can see here on the left, it's created that init and that record folder. And in the init, we've got that initialized db.sql file. You can have a look through here, but basically what it's doing is it's setting all of the configuration parameters for the database when it first runs. Now all you've got to do is basically spin up this compose file. Now heading over onto Portainer, just have a quick look what's going on here. You can see Guacamole, Guacd and MySQL up and running. The database has initialized and all of that looks good there. It says it's ready for connections. That's great. The daemon is also ready and waiting. And finally, Guacamole, that looks like it's connected. And yeah, now it's ready. So now you're pretty much ready to go and access this in your browser. Just for the record, if we look at mine here, we should be able to go to that guacamole.jimsgarage.co.uk and access this through the browser. So if I add this into my browser, hopefully I'll get to the login page. Do note that if you're very quick in terms of when you deploy this and try and access it, it can take a few seconds for this to actually spin up and finish. But now we're on the login page, we need to log in with the default admin, which if you go back to my compose file, you'll see that it's the guacadmin just doubled up. So with the username and password of guacadmin, we should be able to log in for the first time. And do note what's going on here, changing the password. Obviously it's picked this up as a commonly used password because it is the default. Now what I recommend you do before you go any further is actually go into the settings and create, say, a new user. We don't necessarily want to be logging in as the admin. So I'll create a new user. I'll just call this one James. I'll give it a secure password of James. And I'll give this one the capability to create new connections, new groups, and I'll change my own password. So let's click save. And then hopefully I should be able to log out. And hopefully this time we should be able to log in with that new user. Yes, we can. And now we basically have a bit more of a secure setup, especially if you're going to be using this in more of a workplace enterprise environment. You definitely want to have controls around permissions and what people can do, etc. Now, if we go into the settings on this user, all we can see is connections and preferences basically for this user I'm on. So things like we can change a password because we specified it. Let's quickly log back in as the admin, just because I want to give a quick overview of all of the settings that are possible before we actually get into setting this up with our first connection. This time, if we go to the settings with the admin account, you'll see we've got quite a few more things. We've got history of previous connections. We've got all of the users that we can manage. We've got groups that we can assign to put people into. This could be useful if you've got, say, people in different territories, people in different parts of the business, etc. We've also got the connections, and we'll go on to that in a moment. And then we've got the standard preferences that you've seen before. And we've also got changes in how we do the default input method and mouse emulation. So I'm going to quickly log back in as my other user just to demonstrate good practice. Now I'm logged back in as James. Let's go ahead and create our first connection. Now exactly the same, even using the same machines, you can see I've still got the names Rust Desk. I basically created a Linux desktop machine, a standard Windows 11 virtual machine, and then finally just a Linux with SSH enabled. So a good split of common operating systems you'll find within your home lab. So now to create a new connection, we would just click New Connection. But what's a good idea first is to create groups that we can assign connections to. So if we click on a new group, let's just create, say, Home Lab. And that will be in the root, and I'm going to leave everything else as default. So now when I click Save, you can see we've got Home Lab. And then again, maybe within this one, we want to create within Home Lab. Maybe we have something like Windows. We hit Save, and maybe then we have something like, I don't know, Linux. Now you can see how you can start to put different groups in, which is pretty cool. And now when we create a new connection, we'll actually be able to specify where we want it to go. So let's say, for example, first, let's do that Windows virtual machine. So for this one, I'm going to create Windows 11. And the protocol, as you know, probably is RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol. That's the Windows protocol. And if we actually scroll down, the bit that we want really is here, the host name, the port, and then later on the authentication. Now the IP address of the Windows 11 virtual machine I created ends in 134, and the default port should be 3389. I don't think you need to populate that, but it's just in case it was running on a different port. Now filling in my username and password, I should then be able to get on to actually configuring the security mode. Now the security mode for Windows RDP should be the NLA, network level authentication. And because this is using a self-signed certificate, we're going to click to ignore the server certificate. Now, if we go down a little bit further, you can obviously look at some more advanced features. So for example, if you had a larger Windows estate and you had a remote desktop gateway, you could run it through that. You can also as well do some basic settings like programs that you want to load up when you go in. Different keyboard layouts per specific VM, maybe you've got them in different locales, etc. Different time zones, all those sorts of things. You can also specify things like the resolution, the color depth for when you want to connect to each virtual machine. You can also select whether you want to have copying enabled to this virtual machine, which again, if you go down the route of having different users in different groups, they might have different permissions that you want to grant them. You've also then got some further settings around, do you want to have audio enabled, enable printing, enable drives, file uploads, etc. And then you've got some performance tuning, so if you're on a slow connection, you might want to do things like disable wallpapers, all that kind of stuff. The last thing that's possibly quite useful is screen recording. So you saw in the Docker Compose file where we have that /record folder. You could put that in here and this would be able to capture the screen that you've got, and that could be useful, say, I don't know, if you're making YouTube videos. The last thing really is whether we want to enable SFTP, which stands for the Secure File Transfer Protocol. Maybe you want to be collecting and sending files over that, and you can configure that here by enabling this SFTP server. I have had a little bit of issue with this in the past. It has made my connections hang and become unresponsive. I'm not sure whether that's a bug or me just setting this up incorrectly. But it's good to know that it is there, and you'll need to provide your public and private keys to make that work. Lastly, we do have the Wake on LAN ability, so we should be able to wake these machines if they're configured to listen to Wake on LAN. Obviously, you'll need to have that supported and perhaps mirrored on your switch as well, especially if you're going over different VLANs. But we should be able to now click Save, and now you can see in here that we've got this connection here. Now you can't click that. If you do click this, you're on the connections tab, that will go back into the edit mode. The way that you actually need to get onto this is to go to James and then go to home, and now you'll see this connection here, and hopefully we should be able to log in. Yep, perfect. Now you can see that we're logged in, And because by default I didn't have things like the wallpaper enabled, obviously it's defaulted to that black screen, which should give you the most responsive feedback, but doesn't look as pretty. But anyway, here you can see now that we've got this, we're remoted into that machine, and we can basically use this like we would RDP. We can go back, and now what's quite handy is if I just remove my face, we can see that we've got this session still active down here. So the great thing here is as you add more connections, so we can go back to the settings, create a new connection. So for example, let's this time create a home lab and let's make it a Linux one. We can use a SSH. The cool thing is when we add new ones and new sessions, we can actually toggle between them quite quickly down here. So when I log into this one that we're going to SSH into, that will show up as a box down here. And simply to switch between them, we just need to click on the respective little pictures of them. And now, depending on how you've got your virtual machine set up, this is just a cloud init image. This does require a SSH key to authenticate, which I do recommend if you are going to do that route. But if you're not using an SSH key, then just put in your username and password and you should be able to save this. So now with that saved and going back to the home, you can see now we've got this Windows 11 which is still active, and now we've got this new Linux SSH connection. So fingers crossed I can click on this and we can access it. And so now we are connected via SSH to this machine. And if we go back, you can now see that we've got the two sessions active. So if we want to click Windows, we can just go to this one. If we want Linux, we just go to that one, which is pretty awesome. We've got both of those running concurrently. And so you can basically just keep reflecting this process now for all of your virtual machines, and you'll be able to get them up and administered through Guacamole. Now, the elephant in the room, I haven't been able to get this working with Linux desktop, specifically Ubuntu 25, and I was hoping that version 1.6 might have fixed that. Maybe it has, and I've got an issue with my setup. If you do know how to get that working, do drop a comment below. I have been able to use older versions of Linux, and I think it's the change from moving from Wayland that's causing the issues with the drivers. I think it uses free RDP, which again should work, but I think version 2 and version 3 there might be some compatibility issues. I have seen some issues raised on the GitLab for this, so hopefully that's being worked on, and maybe in subsequent versions it will work. Maybe just the version of Ubuntu I'm using is too bleeding edge. But even so, you should be able to SSH into those machines because that should still be available. Anyway, this basically wraps up now getting this done in a local deployment. We've now got these two. If we were to go over to the settings here, for example, you can now see that we've got both of these active sessions. We could kill these sessions if we wanted to, or we could click the X on each respective one. That's pretty cool, and now those sessions have ended. Obviously, if you're an admin, you'd be able to see all of your user sessions, and you'd be able to delete the ones that you don't want people to still have access to. Now that we've got that up and running, let's quickly reflect what I did in the last video, whereby we might want to use something like Tailscale to actually get this set up and be used in the cloud. So we could put and deploy our Guacamole over in a VPS, for example, and then we could set up a mesh VPN to make sure that the connections between all of these devices are secured through that VPN. So here we are with the VPS I've set up using Hetzner. I'm not going to go into details of how to do this. I covered this in the last video. I recommend you check out that video for this entire process, but also because looking at RustDesk versus Guacamole, I think it's a good worthwhile consideration. So here you can see that I've set up the VPS. After that, I went into VS Code, I connected to it, and then I spun up the same Guacamole instance just on this VPS. After I'd spun up the VPS, what I did then was to go over to Tailscale, and I deployed a node onto it. You can see this at the bottom. Now with this node, you can see the IP address is 100 and it ends in 91. And now if we actually go to that site, here you can see 191 on port 8095. So now on the IP address, you can see that we've now reached Guacamole again. But the beauty of this is it's all running through a VPN, no external access, but with the benefit of having a VPS. So if ever we want to reboot our servers, our infrastructure, etc., Guacamole should still be up there and allow us to remote in. So logging into this one, we can see we've got exactly the same user experience. Now I'm going to be a bit naughty here. I'm just going to create the connections using the admin account. Obviously I recommend going through the same process, setting up a new user. But let's just do a connection here. We'll do a new connection and let's connect to that Windows 11 machine, but this time we'll use the Tailscale network. This time I'm going to grab the IP address that's associated with the Tailscale network. I'm going to put in the port again, 3389. I'll put in the same username and password as previously. Set the security mode back to the NLA, and I'm going to ignore that certificate. Scroll down and I'm going to hit save, and fingers crossed this will allow me now to connect to that machine. So let's test that out. Let's hit this Windows 11 and fingers crossed. Yeah, we're in. Excellent. That's exactly what we expected. However, now all of this traffic is being routed through the VPS running Guacamole via Tailscale, which is awesome. So thanks for watching, everybody. Hopefully now you've got an overview of Guacamole and you can decide how you want to deploy it. Locally, maybe with a VPS, maybe with Tailscale. Who knows? It's up to you. Now you're probably thinking, James, which one are you going to use? Good question. I'm probably going to go with Guacamole, but purely because I'm a little bit lazy and I don't want to have to install the client for RustDesk onto each machine. Now that does come with a caveat. RustDesk does work with Linux desktop, whereas currently the Guacamole, I couldn't get it to work. Not to say it doesn't, I just don't know how to do that. However, that doesn't really seem to be an issue for me because I don't really have any Linux desktops. They're all headless and I can connect via SSH. So I'm going to be rolling out this version of Guacamole I've got. I probably won't do it in the VPS. I will probably do it locally, but that's only because I'll stick it in my Kubernetes cluster, which is clustered anyway. So I never take down all of the machines. That should fail over to a different machine when I do my reboot, patching cycles, etc. Anyway, let me know what you think about Guacamole, what you think about RustDesk, which one you think's best for you. Really interested as well for anybody who uses this in an enterprise solution. Has it been useful? Is it scalable? What does it perform like? Etc. Anyway, if you've liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe. I'll see you on the next one. Take care, everybody.